Hi, welcome everyone. We are thrilled to have you joining us for our panel, Supporting Work-Life Balance for Yourself and Your Team. I'd love if we can all kick it off by just going and sharing where we're joining from. So for the audience, if you can jump over to YouTube or a LinkedIn live stream, you'll be able to participate in the chat that way. And we'd love to see where everyone is joining from. While you're doing that, my name is Hannah, and I'm your moderator and a member of the Purpose Jobs team. We are your hosts today. If you're unfamiliar, Purpose Jobs is your Midwest storyteller and community builder for the startup and tech industry. One housekeeping item is we'd love to just see you all engage as much as possible. So please use that chat. Let us know where you're from to begin with, but then throughout the conversation, feel free to chime in if we say something that really resonates with you, with your own advice. Feel free to post questions throughout the conversation, and we'll work to incorporate them as where it's most relevant. With those things taken care of, let's go ahead and jump into today's topic. So today's topic, work-life balance, or maybe you think of it like work-life harmony, work-life integration. There are different ways that you can refer to it. But I think what's really important here is knowing that, it is finding that harmony between them because, one is going to bleed into the other and vice versa, whether it's a sick kid who interrupts your workday or a big project with a deadline that might lead into the evening. Finding that balance between them is really important. And it is one of top talent's highest priorities. So it's really important that leadership is making that a core part of their culture. Plus, we just think it's the right thing to do. So today we're here to chat with some industry experts about how HR and people leaders can really create that work-life balance for their team and their company while also maintaining it for themselves. So I want to give an extra special thank you to our panelists, as well as to all of you for joining today's conversation. You all make this community, and we're really grateful to have you here. And with that too, be sure to check out our recent Work-Life Balance Award list and article to see some expert examples of companies who are really doing great things with the work-life balance side. And so with that, let's go ahead and get started with introductions. So to our panelists, I'd love if you can go and just share your name and a brief background and a little bit more about your company. So Alex, can I kick things to you first?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Hannah. And just always love partnering with the Purpose Jobs team. But yeah, Alex Simmons, co-founder and CEO at Boon. And my background is actually more in the finance world. So I'm actually a CPA by background. I worked in investment banking and private equity prior to this. And the foundation from Boon actually kind of stems from my investment banking days, which, if you know anything about that world, it's, the 80 to 100-hour work weeks. People are generally fairly stressed, anxious, burnt out. You hear a lot about that. And through my own journey, I found coaching and therapy outside of the workplace during my time working in investment banking, and it really had a transformational impact on my life. And I kind of had two ahas going back into the workplace at the time. One of them was that all of my colleagues were dealing with very similar challenges to what I was. Everybody was stressed, everybody was burnt out. And my employer at the time, which is really a progressive employer by all means, they really relied on what's called an EAP program or employee assistance program for employee support at the time. And as I came to find, that's how roughly 80% of all employers were thinking about supporting really more the mental health of their employees. And the more I learned about EAP, the more I realized that it's really more designed as a crisis intervention resource, kind of designed for end of the line care, end of the line support. Yet there was nothing there to support me and all of my employees who were dealing with something very similar. So that was really what stemmed Boon, which is a democratized one-to-one coaching platform for employees that we really see as sitting at the intersection between personal and professional growth. So while we started as more of a mental well-being platform, the business has really evolved into becoming this performance management for the whole human solution that has really scaled across the country. So excited to be here today and share more about some of what we're seeing in the workplace.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Jasmine, I'll kick it over to you for an intro.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. And also thank you for having me here and for organizing this panel. So a little bit about me. I worked at Microsoft for almost a decade. And before that, I did consulting with PricewaterhouseCoopers. And across several roles that I held, the key focus was on enhancing employee and organization capability and doing it through data and evidence-based insights. So my experience working in consulting and at Microsoft was that a lot of analytics work was being done very manually. And often, like HR or organizational behavior teams were saddled with that task without the right technology platforms, and which meant that majority of their time was spent in analyzing the information, and less was left on actually driving real change. And even in a large company like at Microsoft, that could throw immense resources and technical talent for such kind of analytics, we were doing the analysis periodically, quarterly or annually. But employee experience doesn't start and stop every quarter. It's a continuous experience. So that's what prompted me to work on Culturebie. So a little bit about Culturebie. Culturebie helps organizations integrate different types of data sources that helps them get more evidence-based understanding of employee experience and organizational culture. And the end result of what we do through analytics helps companies retain and engage their talent and also drive a high-performance culture. Currently, we have our employee listening products in the market in terms of employee engagement surveys and 360 feedback, and we are slowly stepping into ambient data analytics that taps into passive data in the organization. So that's a little bit about me and about Culturebie.
Awesome. Thank you, Jasmit, for walking through that. So we have two great panelists today. So first question, one, I want to know, what's your favorite phrase to refer to work-life balance? Is it balance, harmony, integration, something else? And just what does that mean to you holistically? So Jasmit, can I kick it to you first this time?
Yeah, I don't know. You probably sensed I have strong feelings about the terminology that we use. So work-life balance is what I think is the nice neutral term to use. It basically implies from an employer's standpoint that they are creating an environment and a work structure where employees are able to deliver on their work commitments without having to sacrifice the time they need to attend to their non-work related and personal priorities. So that is the duty, that is the the expectation we should have from employers, which is providing that environment and ecosystem where employees can do both the work as well as attend to what they need to do in their personal lives. Mm-hmm. Now, work-life integration is one of the ways to achieve work-life balance. And I hesitate to use it interchangeably with work-life balance because A, it assumes that everyone is okay with having a fluid conception of work and life boundaries. Whereas our data clearly shows that there are some employees that like that strict boundary and some that don't. So the underlying assumption of work-life integration is that fluidity and that everybody wants it. No, I like it personally, but I know many other people wouldn't like it. Mm-hmm. So that's one. The second thing is it implicitly, depending again on the definition of work-life integration, it excludes jobs that cannot have the fluidity and are not location agnostic, like hourly employees and in industries like healthcare, retail, and hospitality. So for example, some of the examples that we often give about work-life integration is, you can take a break to exercise, you can work from home while taking care of a family member. Now, these are things that are not feasible sometimes for an entire segment of workforce and sometimes an entire industry. So hence, I stick with the term work-life balance and think of work-life integration as one of the mechanisms to achieve that work-life balance.
That makes a ton of sense. Thanks for making that distinction, Jasmit. Alex, tell us about how you think about it.
Well, I mean, I think you articulated really well just the different way. I mean, it really is such a dependent sector specific question now. And I mean, just the way that our economy has changed throughout COVID, where remote work has become so accelerated across the economy. So, most of the companies that we're working with today are more of that knowledge economy, white collar type businesses where it's in a remote or hybrid setting where you do have that additional flexibility, which, in my view, what comes with that additional flexibility is more of that ability to integrate. So I veer on the side with that sort of business with the terminology around work-life integration. But I totally agree that, there are some industries, you think more blue collar industries where you're heavily in person, you're clocking in and out from a 9 to 5, and that is your role.
Yeah.
The integration terminology is not going to be for everybody. So I think,
Yeah.
through the Boon organization, where we're a remote workforce and it is very flexible, and we pride ourselves on being flexible. But I think what inherently comes with that is that ability to be able to integrate seamlessly into our lives. And I think that has become challenging for a lot of people is like, what does that new normal look like, where you find that, I guess, harmony between being able to successfully integrate into your day to day. But I definitely think it is sector and job dependent for sure.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Thank you both for sharing there. The next thing that I want to dive into here is, why is work-life balance so important? What are those positive impacts that we can see in work and life when we have that balance? So just kind of digging into that a little bit more. Alex, would you mind kicking us off on this one?
Sure. And I mean, I think with a lot of these factors, there's always a lot of confounding factors associated with this data. So I think you always have to take it with a grain of salt. But you think about the Gen Z and millennial generations, which now make up over a majority of the workforce today. Particularly in the white collar setting, there was a study that came out a few years ago that was talking about how 85% of millennial and Gen Z talk about how work-life balance is one of the critical factors in determining what employer they are ultimately going to end up choosing. And so when you think purely from a recruiting perspective, not to mention the retention element, where, Gallup has estimated that the cost of turning over one employee is anywhere between a half to 2 times that annual salary of that individual. So when you think about the numbers associated with recruiting that employee, as well as the cost of turning over that employee, there is lots of hard data out there associated with the impact of burnout and overall stress and anxiety, which is closely tied to work-life balance, that it is inevitably going to turn into higher rates of turnover. And then the other thing we look at is rates of productivity. And we've seen this data within Boon, where 85% of all employees who are working with a Boon coach for more than 6 sessions are seeing higher rates of productivity after working with their coach. Commonly, they are working with their coaches around topics like work-life balance. We've also seen different studies come out that work-life balance has improved by an average of about 20%, or rather productivity has improved by an average of about 20% for those employees who are reporting positive work-life balance. So, the 3 big ones that we look at are recruiting, retention, and productivity. And then there's a whole host of other analytics out there that, Jasmit, I'm sure, being the people analytics platform, you have lots of thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I'll just build on the key thing that you touched on, which is engaging and retaining employees, and the cost impact of that. The Gallup, Gallup and many other companies have shown that evidence, and we've seen it in our data as well. And it's often like in the whole work-life balance conversation, the frontline employees and hourly employees get left out. So I'll actually share an example of hourly employee data and evidence that we saw. We worked with a customer that had over 70% turnover in their hourly workforce. And once we looked at the feedback, what we realized was, work-life integration is not something that really works for that particular segment of workforce, at least in the sector that we are working in. But what the hourly employees really wanted was more predictability on their work schedules, more decisive action on helping them predict what their shift patterns would look like, and having some choice about the shifts and overtime. And once the company addressed those factors, which are all related to work-life balance for hourly employees, they saw within a year that the turnover was down to 35%. Of course, like there are often, like you said, Alex, there are confounding factors, but one of them, a very strong one, was their work-life balance experience. So engagement and retention is like, very, very well understood, both in academic literature as well as the practitioner work that Alex and I are doing. The second piece is higher productivity and performance. Again, Alex, you touched on that. What I love is like, some of the studies, and often like productivity-based studies are not that common in organizations, but there's one that I love to quote as an example. A couple of years ago, I think in 2015, like Gap, the clothing company, they worked intensively on helping employees, particularly their sales associates, schedules to be more predictable and flexible. And within 9 months, first, the sales associates reported that they were able to better manage their work-life balance challenges. The supervisors also reported that the morale was better. And more importantly, it's something that I've seen like executives care about a lot and most in some forms, is that the sales increased by 7% and labor productivity by 5%. That is immense. That is huge. And I often like to underscore these financial business revenue related metrics, because in this fuzzy conversation about work-life balance, sometimes that aspect, that value proposition gets lost. And lastly, I will say is that by emphasizing and providing good work-life balance, you also build a better and a more diverse workforce, because it's well known that it is women and minoritized groups that have the biggest work-life balance challenges related to childcare, providing care for a family member, etc. And when companies support work-life balance, they automatically prevent these employee segments from dropping out of the workforce and become more appealing for them as an employer. So those are broadly the three things and some examples that we've seen shine through in that space.
I love that. And I love the data-driven approach you both are taking here. That's really great. Awesome. So next question I want to dive into here is just more like current state of work-life balance. COVID has kind of taken us on a roller coaster. So can you guys talk a little bit about like where we are right now with work-life balance? Are we in a good spot? Do we still have room to grow? I know remote work probably plays a part into that when it comes to those knowledge worker type roles. So I'd love to just kind of hear from you all what you're perceiving as like current trends or factors that are making an impact. Alex, can I go to you again on this one?
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting to see, and we're talking to HR leaders and business leaders every single week, and it's been really interesting to see really how splintered the economy feels, where, throughout COVID, it really was an employee market where, you heard about the Great Resignation, where it was like, how many benefits can I bring to my organization, where I need to check all of the boxes just to compete to find the level of talent that I want to have. And we've seen a big pendulum shift in terms of favoring the employer over the last 18 months that I think has been really prevalent across, really the broad spectrum of what types of benefits are we bringing on board. Is it really bringing, Jasmit just cited some of these real tangible ROI metrics associated with the business. Are we really able to prove out dollars and cents that we are earning or saving associated with this benefit? Is it absolutely mission critical? And does work-life balance fall into that category, where we've seen, for the most part, employers have continued to embrace this new culture of millennial and Gen Zs feel like this is such an important topic, as well as other generations really feeling like work-life balance is such an important piece of just overall well-being and just commitment to the organization. But we also have seen some organizations that have just said, hey, stuff is hard right now. We don't have time. We don't have time to be talking about work-life balance. So we really have seen both ends of the spectrum here. And it's been really interesting to see the differing approaches there. I would say, we're typically working with businesses that are valuing those sorts of conversations, but we definitely are starting to see that other end of the spectrum start to appear more and more. And Jasmine, I'd be curious, is that something you're seeing in your conversations with customers? Am I in a bubble of some sort, or, what are you seeing out there?
Similar things, but I'll add another layer to how more proactive organizations who don't want to follow trends, but
Yeah.
continue to track um, the man continue to track the impact of their decisions. Uh,
Yeah.
they are going to be the winners ultimately.
Yeah.
So what I'm seeing is definitely, you're talking about the pendulum shift. I refer to the pendulum, but also to this sort of a tug of war that was happening between employees and the leaders, and
Yeah.
basically companies and the workforce. And yes, we are seeing more and more that the negotiation power is shifting more in the hands of employers. But employees are continuing to ask and expect more in terms of work-life balance support.
Yeah.
It hasn't dropped off. It's just a question of time. It's just a question of the industry they are in, whether there are
Yeah.
layoffs happening, whether it's easy or hard to find a job. Those things impact how vocal they are, but deep inside in our data and our qualitative data that we gather, it's very clear that there was a transformation that happened during the pandemic. People recognized that they really value work-life balance, and between two companies that offer same kinds of benefits, compensation, career growth, etc. Employees are always going to go to the one that has a better work-life balance. I think that's commonsensical. The second thing, so that's the employee side. Very clear, they're continuing to ask for better work-life balance support. The second is from the company standpoint. We are seeing things settling in terms of some companies being very clear about their return to office, the RTO strategy, that we are going to return to the office. It would be 3 weeks. It might be 3 days out of a week. It could be 5 days out of a week. Here are the policies. Here are the implications. If you do not adhere to it, there would be consequences related to promotion, performance, and even termination. So some companies, especially I'm talking about some of the West Coast companies, technology companies that were supposed to be the flag bearers of remote work, they made a hard pivot to advocate and to basically adopt the policies around return to office. But we are also seeing some of our customers, and generally the industry-wide trend, where companies are settling into more like hybrid work. But they're continuing to track data. They're continuing to see how does the work patterns of remote workers, hybrid workers, and in the office workers is impacting productivity, is impacting collaboration, because collaboration is often the one that leaders claim to be the thing that suffers innovation, collaboration, these intangible things. And that's where people analytics can really make these intangible concepts real. Ambient data analytics that studies network patterns about how employees are engaging with each other, you can analyze it over time and get signals about whether it's weaker, stronger, how the trend has changed over time based on where employees are based. So we are seeing a segment of more people first companies, let's say, let's call them people first companies, taking that kind of a step that let's be more data oriented and not make these decisions based on what the industry trend looks like or what our leadership team feels like doing. Lastly, I think the big point was more focus on data and evidence is a trend that we are seeing. Again, I will qualify that's with a very narrow segment of the companies.
Yeah. And just two things to add to what you're talking about. First thing related to the return to office. That's one of the most common conversations that we're having right now is our back to office strategy. How are our people responding? What is the friction there? And I think we've landed that most companies we're working with are finding some sort of hybrid approach that they're trying to get people back towards. And it's falling somewhere in that like 50% back in office range. And it seems like we've kind of plateaued at that level. And at least for now, that seems to be the percentage of time that folks are going to be back in the office. We'll see what that looks like longer term, but it seems like around 50% is what we're seeing. And then the other thing I was just going to say is, you mentioned layoffs, which I think adds such an interesting wrinkle to this equation, where we've seen a lot of companies experience layoffs, and it just exacerbates the conversation where you're now being asked to do more with less, which makes, yes, you're still asking for that work-life balance, and now you're being asked to do even more with less. So it's just, there's a lot of competing priorities that are going on right now across organizations, and it's definitely evolving in a really interesting way there.
Yeah. And Alex, your company and the work that you're doing plays such a key role, because an employee's work-life balance experience is not impacted by what the top leadership team is saying or communicating. It's impacted the most by their immediate manager. It's impacted by the decisions they make for themselves. So if the coaching and their capability gets enhanced to have the right conversations, and managers are coached to not do just lip service around work-life balance, I think that causes true change.
Yep, 100%.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you both for those insightful answers. So I think we've really covered kind of the high level, the why behind it. So let's start to get really tangible for our HR and people leaders out there. Because as you were just saying, Jasmit, what kind of their approach to it, it's going to really make that difference there. So what are some of the tangible things or policies that HR leaders and people managers can really be doing to create and encourage that work-life balance for their employees? And also feel free to hit the flip side of like, what are the things that can be most detrimental to that as well? Jasmit, can I go back to you on this one?
Yeah. And I'm going to start with something so basic and so boring. It's something that I have never adhered to myself in life, which is, having that sense for, how many hours of work are we really expecting from employees? Honestly, I've never paid attention to how many hours I gave to my employer. I was so passionate about my work. I was so excited about it. I obviously, for most of my career, worked way, way, way beyond the hours that were expected. But it's the job of the employer to ensure that they are not exploiting their employees. So my employers, my managers, they never asked me to work beyond the typical, I'm a knowledge worker, so there is no 8 to 5 or 9 to 5. But still, there wasn't this expectation that I would be working on weekends. There was no expectation that I would be working in the evenings, etc. I worked it out of my own volition. So I think the first thing I'll say is that being very mindful of the hours of work expected from employees, both explicitly and implicitly. So as a manager, it's your responsibility to ensure that the work commitments that you carve out are realistic and do not require employees to work on weekends and work late into the night. Of course, I understand that some people like working late into the night, and they are the whole chronological working, which is that their sleep patterns actually make them more productive at night. I'm not talking about that. The total number of hours really jives with the work commitments that are being set up. So that's one, being mindful of that. We've done research where employees have come back and said, and in fact, one of those studies was in collaboration with Purpose Jobs, where employees said, my manager says that, we'll do all this work-life balance stuff. And then has meetings, long meetings for most of the week, leaving very little time to help me work on my daily commitments, which means inevitably I end up working on weekends. So that's the kind of thing, really being mindful about the hours. So that's a basic and boring thing, but I cannot tell you how many managers, how many organizations miss that piece. The second piece I'll say is adopting organizational practices that really echo the organization's commitment to work-life balance. And that means number one, are leaders and managers being good role models? How are employees being recognized? If time and again, the employees that get recognized are the ones who just stay in the office till late, from an optic standpoint, they are the one who are working a lot, many hours. It just sends a signal. And lastly, how does performance management work? Is it truly outcome based, or does it really depend on the hours employees spend working? And here I will say, and I've been through umpteen calibration meetings for performance management, you will see employees who go above and beyond out of their own volition. They work a lot and they will bring better results. And those employees will get better performance management results. They will get higher bonuses, they will get promotions, but that is based again on the outcomes and not just purely based on the number of hours that they spent on work. And that's a slight distinction I want to make. And lastly, what are the benefits that the companies provide? I think an offering like Alex's company, what Boon offers, would be a great one. I'll plug for you, Alex, right here. Flexible work, remote work, vacation time, sick time. I think we have a lot of examples, parental leave, childcare options, etc. But a key thing I have to mention is the less gendered these benefits are, the better. For example, companies that offer just maternal leave are actually hurting diversity and inclusion, because now all of a sudden hiring managers or leaders who are looking at promotions, etc., in the back of their minds, it's like, oh, this is a woman, she is going to avail, and she is of this benefit, and she's going to be, not performing at the level that we expect from our employees. But if you offer parental leave for both men, women, and anybody else, who wants to avail of it, now you're, make it all an equal field. You're not making distinctions on how you hire people, what you expect, how they would perform, how you promote them, because everyone is equitably availing of those leaves, which often have a little bit of a gendered tone to it. So, yeah.
I love that. So much good stuff in there. Alex, I'll kick it over to you to share your thoughts.
So a lot of good stuff in there. And, I think one of the things to call out is, I think there are a lot of differences between a small business environment and a larger business environment where, me being the founder of a small business, sometimes I feel like I don't have the ability to just completely unplug outside of work hours. Do I expect that of my team? Absolutely not. Like I am an owner of the company. I feel like I have different expectations on myself, and I want to be really explicit about how I communicate that expectation is not for anybody else, where if I am doing something at 10 o'clock at night, like that's not for everybody else, that's for me. And I think even with that, I am intentionally setting like 6:30 to 8:30 every night is family time. It's blocked out of my calendar. That is like an actual meeting that's set on my calendar. And I think there's a huge element that is like, it has to start at the top, and it's leadership's job, and it's the workplace's job to be able to set that culture. And I think it all starts at the top. And to what you're saying, Jasmine, like it can't just be lip service. This has to be something that if you're putting something into action, it is something that leadership is following from top down. And we've seen that with the success of a program like Boon too, within an organization where like there's a clear correlation between the success of the program and how bought in senior leaders are to that program. So we see that with benefits as well as things like work-life balance for sure. The other thing I would just say is, I was actually just doing a podcast around the topic was around new managers and dealing with time management challenges that they're having. And one of the biggest challenges that we have come across is just these time management and productivity issues where it's an individual contributor who's used to, they're just going through their to-do list, they're checking through their list, and now all of a sudden they're thrusted into a new managerial position because they were doing so well. And it's just assumed that they know how to start managing people and transition into this new role. When in reality, it's like, okay, I'm just going through my to-do list, but I'm not sure how to start delegating. I'm not sure how to start managing this team of individual contributors that I now have underneath me. So there's this big challenge where now, because I'm not able to work efficiently as a new manager or new leader, I now have this significantly more work on my plate that I don't know how to manage. And so we've seen that has led to this idea of, well, now I have to do a lot more with less time. And it's this big challenge around how do we equip these new managers? How do we equip these new leaders with the right tools and resources to be able to deal with this new way of working in an efficient way, where you don't have to have that same fear of getting through my to-do list while also still having to manage my team. How do I do that in the most efficient way? So I think a lot of it is just really ensuring those right resources are in place to be able to level up your people and get them ready for that next level. And I think that's something that we have seen a lot of in the small to mid-sized business in particular category, where, you talk about a Microsoft, they've probably got a learning and development team of 20, 30 people potentially. But if you're talking to your average small business, you've got an HR team of 1 to maybe 3 people. They're spread super thin. There's no robust learning and development infrastructure. They may not even have one. So it's like, how are these resources being developed and distributed across the organization? It all ties back to this sort of topic.
Yeah. And I'd love to dig into that further, Alex, because, I think we're talking a lot about, different policies and things like that, but knowing that direct manager that you report to is going to make such a big impact. And like you said, especially when people are stepping into new management roles, or even if they're existing manager, making sure that they really understand how to support work-life balance for their reporting team members. I'm curious, what advice would you all share with those actual people managers, not the HR side of things, but how can they really work with their team to encourage and foster work-life balance? Or, and I know that it's going to be like unique for each individual person. So also kind of understanding how to meet an employee where they are, like, are they wanting to take, of their own volition, like really be turning stuff forward? Like, how do we really kind of figure out where people are to and support them based on where they are in that journey? Yeah. Either of you want to jump on that one?
Yeah, it's close to my heart because it's what happens between an employee and immediate supervisor level is what makes the biggest difference to employee experience. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that employee preferences can come at play. Where employees are in terms of their expectations, what do they prefer, what's work-life balance for them can vary. It is not a one-size-fits-all issue. And that's where employee listening is really, really critical. And what I mean in very simple, plain English employee listening is employee surveys. It's something that traditionally organizations tend to look at an all-up data set, which is like, hey, let's look at all an organizational level, 80% satisfaction. Here are the 5-6 dimensions we looked at. Work-life balance is 85%. We are done. And that's the kind of approach that will not help. What really helps is drilling down, identifying employee segments, looking at manager level information, seeing what the preferences are, what are employees telling us in terms of where would they rate work-life balance? B, what are the factors that impact work-life balance? And 3, the qualitative data that gives you more rich narrative on how managers, how the organization can support them. So I really would underscore the importance of not doing surveys just for, again, the whole dog and pony show where you got like 80% satisfaction, but really driving change based on listening. I tend to use employee listening because surveys often become very performative. Listening is when you're deep diving on the data and getting insights to drive real change.
Thanks, Jasmine.
That's great. And I think as a corollary to that, I think something that we feel like is really important in our own organizations, and I think it plays a pivotal role in just, I mean, that manager individual contributor relationship is just one-on-ones. And I think so much of this comes down to communication. And I mean, unfortunately, we've continued to hear that throughout COVID, it's become quite prevalent that in a lot of situations, managers have been serving as pseudo therapists, in the words of HR leaders, for their individual contributors. But I think as part of that conversation, there needs to be an open dialogue and a trust between that individual contributor and the manager, where in those one-on-ones, the manager should be asking on a consistent basis, like, how are you doing? How can I be more supportive for everything that you're doing? Do you feel like you have good work-life balance right now? Like, is that something you are actively talking about? And does it feel like a trustworthy open line of communication is there between the managers and individual contributors of that organization? I think we've seen a lot of organizations that don't necessarily have that trust built in. And what it leads to is all of these turnover, productivity, engagement issues that we mentioned earlier on in the episode. So I think really having that transparent, open line of communication and consistent one-on-one culture we've seen has been extremely impactful in our own organization and with our customers as well.
Yeah. And I want to just build on that. Sometimes the baseline trust is very little in companies. Employees don't feel comfortable, like, having those very open one-on-ones with their managers or giving very open feedback in the surveys that are floated. But one choice is to just never build that trust and never listen to employees, never ask those questions in one-on-ones. The other is to start where we are and incrementally build that trust over time by earning that trust by really responding to the feedback and making positive changes. It really frustrates me when some organizations just give up. Oh, people are not open and people are not. Why? The big question is why? Why is the trust so low? That's a problem, and you can't just leave it at that.
And I just have one more thought around this, which is, lots of times we start to find that these new managers coming into these new roles and say they have training, or say they don't have training, but even if they do have training, we're seeing that these feelings of imposter syndrome and really wanting to do it all start to really come to fruition, right? As you get into this new job, it's like, I want to do a great job. I want to make everybody proud. I want to do it all. And I think sometimes what comes with that is wanting to maybe bite off more than you can chew, or maybe you're being harsh to your individual contributors. So I think especially those newer managers, it's like that transition period of being able to adequately manage that work-life balance during this period where you yourself are feeling so vulnerable and you want to be in control, yet you have to trust the delegation that you have in place with your team members and that it's all going to be okay. That transition period is a really important one in this whole process. So, that's been a really, I think, impactful period for our coaching as well, as like the newer managers, where it's like you're dealing with some of these new emotions of, feeling like a fraud, feeling like a failure, and I need to do X, Y, Z to prove that I'm a good manager. And I think sometimes that's where work-life balance can fall to the wayside.
Awesome. Well, we are almost to time, so I'm going to share one last question. Want to make sure that we provide some tangible tips to our HR people leaders. Alex, you were just starting to get into that a little bit, but what else would we share with them? How can they really make sure that they're taking care of their own work-life balance and mental health while they're supporting either the culture organization-wide or just their individual contributors? Jasmine, anything that you would have to add there?
ruthlessly prioritize your own work. When companies say do more with less, then um, even then, like asking that question, what is the prioritized, what are the organization priorities, and being more data driven, that will help you prioritize the work that has the highest return on investments. That's one, like ruthlessly prioritizing your work. I think the second thing is yourself leveraging your company's work life support options, and it has double advantage. One, you are being the role model for the rest of the company by availing of those, and second, it just supports your work life balance. And lastly, I will say leveraging technology to automate your work to the extent that you can. And one of the big value propositions, for example, we offer to HR teams is that we take over the headache on, let's say, number crunching and getting meaning out of employee feedback and HR analytics. Similarly, like, Gen AI, of course, like, you have to identify the specific use cases and get educated on how to leverage it. But those are some examples, again, of leveraging technology to automate your work.
Love that. Anything to add on your end, Alex?
No, I think those are great. I think, prioritize ruthlessly, but I think also what I mentioned around really trying to find intentional ways to build boundaries between your personal life and work life. I think those lines have become more blurred than ever. And I think you really need to go out of your way to think about what does that look like for you, and how can I be super intentional about that, whether it's literally blocking off meetings on your calendar or whatever that look, changing your Slack emoji to out of office for the night or whatever that looks like. And then I think something that's been really important for me, which I encourage everybody to go through their own process, is like, what does your like best self look like, and what does it take to get you there? And I think for me, it is like a combination of, like, I need to be sleeping right, I need to be working out, I need to be actually talking to my coach on a consistent basis, I have a therapist that I see, like I have an entire net of things that I'm making sure I'm tending to on a consistent basis. And I can actually like feel myself get out of whack, and I'm able to easily point to, okay, well, I haven't really slept very well and I have a 1-month-old baby. So, how are you able to tie different things together to see how all of this is intertwined? And I think being able to get much more intentional around that. Everybody has their own mix that works for them. And I think just being able to identify those things is really important.
Yeah. And I think too, just like making sure that we're always advocating for yourself, like you're saying there, Alex, and really communicating what we need there. Awesome. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We're really grateful there. I feel like we could have talked about this for another 45 minutes, but thank you everyone for your time, for tuning in. If you're not part of the Purpose Jobs community, be sure to subscribe to our newsletter. I'll also drop both Alex and Jasmit's LinkedIn, so feel free to give them a follow and see what additional great insight that they're providing through LinkedIn. So everyone have a great rest of your evening, and we'll see you next time.
Awesome. Thanks, Hannah.